Hello, welcome to AI in Action. My name is Maurie, and I'm here with my husband Jim, and it is Sunday evening. It's been a little chilly here in Texas, so we are dressed appropriately, and I do have a little nice hot cup of tea. So we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. First, we're going to talk for just a second about what all we've been doing and getting prepared for. So actually, we're getting ready for the TCEA Conference, which is the Texas Computer Educators Association Conference 2025.
The last one in Austin.
It is the last one in Austin because
4 or 5 years, I think.
at least 4 or 5 years, because they are going to be tearing down the convention center there in Austin, which I'm kind of curious what people are going to do, like the hotels and stuff. I mean, there's some that are built, like one of them's even connected to the convention center.
Yeah, I'm not
So,
sure.
I mean, I know they'll get plenty of people because people come to Austin all the time, but
The conventions are a big deal.
that's a pretty big hit to their bottom line, I would think. But that's
I
just
would think so too. I would think they could find a better way than to tear it down.
yeah. So we are doing some stuff at the TCEA. I'm
Yes.
excited about it, a little bit stressed because we've got 1 week. We actually sessions start on Saturday of this next weekend. So a little less than a week away. And we are not only doing 3 different sessions where we've been asked to speak on behalf of Llano ISD.
Yep.
We are on a panel discussion where I'm excited about that because we're actually bringing in 2 of our awesome AI trailblazers from one of our elementary schools. They're going to be on a panel with us, and we're going to talk about the stuff that they're utilizing artificial intelligence for in their classroom, things that you don't normally think about. And then I'm going to be on the panel talking a little bit more about the mental health issues and things that happen concerning deepfakes and just like the new world of AI and what we have to think about with students and misinformation and stuff like that. And then you're going to be on because as the CTO, how you've integrated and policies and things you have to think about when it comes to safety and security and policy. And then we might have a friend of ours from another company, and I've got a couple of feelers out there for some additional people, maybe. So,
just for clarity, this is not an AI conference.
It's not. It's a technology conference.
We've been going to this conference since I started at the school district. For Llano ISD, I've been going there to look for vendors because getting vendors that were willing to come to Llano, even though we're only an hour out of Austin, it's always been difficult.
Well, an hour out of Austin is what we were 20 years ago. Now it's an hour and a half because if you are in Austin and you're trying to drive, I know we have somebody right now that's a little bit like they're toward Hutto. And anytime they come to work on something, it is an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes before they get here.
I don't think that's why they're not coming there. They're not coming because they've got so much work to do in Austin.
Why?
Why would they drive out here? We had the same problem. I had a company out of San Antonio tell me that. They're like, I can drive down the street. Why would I come to Llano? And
at least
so,
they're honest about it. At least they're honest about it. A lot
So-
of people, they'll come out and they'll like call them to school and then you never hear from them again. And you think, oh, this might be a good possibility. So we're going and go and meet vendors, hopefully, establish those connections.
And our partners are going to be running. We have a booth, but our partners in AI Ed Pro are going to be running our booth.
Some of the employees, and we're also hiring in some additional help to help
Yes.
our booth, which is awesome. And we're going to be talking about the professional development that we give out or that we, go into other districts and do. That
Our site.
Yeah. And Agnes is going to be showcased.
Yes.
Which Llano ISD has been piloting Agnes for quite some time. And we're looking at putting her into some other schools now. So
We hope.
it's awesome.
We hope.
So this is kind of a different type of a format than what we normally do. Let me get a little sip of my tea real quick. I've gotten hooked on green tea. So this is a little different format than what we normally do because a lot of stuff has been going on with politics. I mean, the inauguration was on the 20th. It is now the 26th. We're only 6 days out of the inauguration. And we are going to actually dive into some politics. And I'm going to kind of treat this almost like you're my guest. Okay? I'm going to ask you some questions because I know that you're rather opinionated.
And I don't like politics.
And you don't like politics. So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot with some questions.
The problem with politics is that politics for me, long before AI, it's been spewing out stuff on the internet. So much of which is garbage, some is good. But politics has been spewing out garbage for a really long time.
Well,
And
we were talking about it earlier.
I hate election years. I hate anything around election years because it's non-stop politics.
Yeah.
There's other things going on in the world that are a whole lot more interesting to me than what politicians have going on in their heads. But anyway,
Okay, so before we continue with this conversation, I need to point out we are giving 3 sessions at the TCEA conference.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's our booth number?
323. We are in booth number 323. I'm excited because we're right across the hall or right across the aisle from the Cricket Center, which is all of the t-shirt presses.
I almost convinced you out of there last year.
Love the Cricket Center. So we're right across from there, 323. We're doing the panel discussion is on Sunday. And then on Monday, we're doing one about how teachers have bigger fish to fry and about how, the stuff that actually goes on in the classroom and how can AI possibly help with some of the national concerns that we have in education. And then on the next day, which is, I guess, Tuesday,
yes,
we are doing our last presentation. And it's really kind of interesting because it's about strategies to combat cyberbullying, or the new paradigm, the new normal when it comes to cyberbullies and AI and deep fakes and misinformation.
Yes.
So that kind of like wraps us back into what we were just talking about with misinformation. When I was a media teacher, or I had the makerspace, we had a section that we did for media. And I can remember going and teaching my kids about photography. And one of the things that we really talked about was perspective. There is a very famous photo of one of our presidents where he's standing at a podium and he is in front of a B-52 bomber, and there is a flag that is draped over the B-52 bomber.
That's a big flag.
Well, that's just it. It really wasn't that big of a flag, but the angle of the camera and exactly how they placed him made it look like that flag would cover the whole thing. And so it was that perspective and that almost like a sleight of hand and misinformation. It made you feel something that if you were actually there in person, you might not have felt that way.
Sure.
So it was all about the capturing. And we also, the famous photo of the very first picture of the Earth from space and how that completely changed our perspective about the size of, the vastness of everything out there, other than just us.
Photography a lot.
I'm sorry, but it's all about perspective.
Okay.
So AI, misinformation, all about perspective. Okay. So here's my first question.
Go for it.
I'm sorry, I got
You like photography.
Art. Okay. The old AI policies got scrapped immediately.
Yes.
Do you see that actually making any waves, or is it just more of the usual back and forth?
Well, it's not going to do much of anything because the old AI policies were not really much of anything.
They were vague.
They were vague. They were focused on safety, and most of the AI companies were going to ignore them anyway because they were too vague. They were too easy to get around. I don't see, it was more of a political move by the current administration to show that they were moving a different direction than the old administration. But you could see all the tech CEOs that were all lined up to make sure the current administration got all, they're all going to make sure that they understand what their needs are. One of them's, they've got social media and they've got self-driving cars, pick which technology they represent. But that old AI policy was probably not going to work anyway because it kind of put government in the role of like the FDA for safety. And it just seemed to me like it was going to be ineffective. So my guess is it's going to mean nothing. It's just political.
I feel sorry for Pat from code.org and TeachAI.
We spent a bunch of time.
And Aaron Moat and some of the people that I've connected with on LinkedIn that I've been on different talks with and stuff. They spent a lot of time, going to DC and talking in front of panels and being at the table. And I just hope that all the stuff that they did is still recognized as the big first step to try to get some governance over some of the AI stuff.
You want my cynical view?
Give me your cynical view.
It's not it's gone.
It's gone.
If they would have done that
2 years ago.
Well, if Biden would have gotten reelected or Kamala Harris would have gotten reelected, so the same policies would stay in place, maybe. But you don't run for office with the idea that you're going to do what the last guy did unless you're in the same party.
Right.
If you're in a different party, then you've got to say, I'm going to do everything that they didn't do, or I'm going to get rid of all their stuff.
Your dad used to always say that the United States goes from one extreme to the other extreme.
No middle.
And there's absolutely no middle. Yeah.
Anyway.
All right, next question.
Shoot.
The Stargate Project. I'm sorry, I just got to laugh.
You should laugh at that name.
It was announced like a big government plan, but it seems like private investors like SoftBank.
Well,
right? They're the ones, it's like a big leap forward. Is it really a big leap forward for AI infrastructure? What is it? Is it just flashing?
Well, what it is an announcement by the current administration that had nothing to do with the current administration. Didn't really have anything to do with the last administration either. Sam Altman from OpenAI has been talking about their need for AI infrastructure. Let's talk about what AI infrastructure is, which, by the way, has nothing to do with Stargate. I liked Stargate. It was one of my favorite sci-fi shows. Kind of insulted that they used the name of one of my favorite sci-fi shows for a project that's completely unrelated to anything like it. Should have been more the space program. Anyway, basically, AI has moved a particular direction. The latest models and stuff from AI, it's all about inferencing. Inferencing means that when you ask an AI a question, and it answered that question, that's called inferencing. And there's compute time inferencing, and then there's training needs for AI. What they're trying to build out, my guess is a whole lot more inferencing compute, because it takes so much horsepower to do this, GPUs. And it takes massive amounts of horsepower, massive amounts of energy, a lot of interconnectivity, sort of like when they were building out the internet, not the World Wide Web, but the internet, and they were connecting the backbone of the internet together. So what they're envisioning is all these large compute centers. I think the first one's in Texas, and the weirdest place, which is Amarillo.
No water.
There's no water. And these GPUs take a tremendous amount of energy, and they also generate a lot of heat, which you generally have some kind of coolant system. So I'm not sure how that's going to work.
I think they're going to hire like 57 people.
I've heard. I don't know if that's a cynical view or real, but I don't see how it takes people to go in and swap out bad servers and make sure things are running, but not a lot. Mm-hmm. This thing's supposed to be like 500,000 square feet or more. It's sort of like, we went and saw the UT when we spoke at UT recently.
The big GPU center.
And we saw that big compute center that they had there. I mean, that wasn't all GPU stuff because it was made before large language models, but it was still a lot because they're doing a lot. Anyway, the Stargate project is SoftBank, Oracle, and OpenAI started. They were the ones that spoke. Oracle.
Did they just put it out there because they're looking for people to give them money?
Of course.
Okay.
Because, and we'll talk more about that in a second, you've got to keep everybody kind of riled up about the U.S. has got to stay in the lead. The U.S. has got to stay in the lead.
About that.
So if you've got to put the fear of falling behind in people, and then you offer a solution to falling behind, which, of course, then you have this weirdly named Stargate project to allow you to say the U.S. is putting a lot of this money into it and all this other stuff. But the reality is I suspect they're going to want money from the government. That's what this is about. They have to have government support, too, because when they start looking for tax breaks or they start looking for whatever it is they're going to look for, they have to have a lot of political pressure come to bear. So a lot of that's going to be about that as well. The biggest concern I'm reading about online is Larry Ellison, who is the Oracle guy.
Mm-hmm.
He had an interview not that long ago where he talked about the need for monitoring, that people would behave better if they were all monitored. In other words,
we had a superintendent that used to say that something that's not monitored is optional.
Yeah, well, he was talking about taking video feed and feeding it. So people are a little concerned about his perspective on these, but I'm a little more cynical about his perspective is that he wants Oracle to be part of this because Oracle's the largest database supplier on the planet. And guess what? When you're using AI and you want it to remember things, where do you put that? You put that in a database.
And you need data. Not only
you have to store the data. The language models are trained with data, but when you start interacting with it, you want it to store Your unique data, well, that's in a database. So he wants to be the database guy.
Okay, so let's talk about the next one.
Okay.
Next question I have for you. Do you buy into this year of agents buzz, or does it seem like Silicon Valley is just trying to push the next big thing? I've been hearing it all over the place. Agents.
Well, you and I talked about agents a year and a half ago. From a purely pragmatic perspective, I don't know of anyone who wants an AI that they have to tell. Nobody wants to just have a chatbot. Chatbots are great. They're useful. We like it. But at the end of the day, you want an assistant.
Absolutely.
You want something that you can say, book me some plane tickets or find this for me, a research agent, whatever.
Call in my prescription at 3:00 tomorrow.
Those are agents. You want the difference between a tool that a language model is using and an agent is whether or not the agent has its own language model. So, in other words, an agent, I can have a language model that's monitoring what's going on, and it interacts with you. It's the user interface to you. Maurie's virtual assistant wants something. Agnes, for example. Agnes, could you find out what time lunch is today? Well, if you just ask it that, it can use a tool and look it up, right? Because that's what the first Agnes did. But if you want to get Agnes to do something beyond that, it has to make decisions to do it.
Almost that's autonomous. It's almost like it's almost autonomous on its own. It goes off and does it on its own, makes decisions on its own.
So do I think 2025 is going to be the year of agents? I do not. Do I think there's going to be a lot of agents out there in 2025? I do. Back to the Stargate Project. They also want these compute centers because when you start using agents, you make millions of them, even if they're not great. It still takes a lot of computational power to run them. And what OpenAI is hoping to do is get rid of some of their dependency on Microsoft. Microsoft owns 49% of them, but they want to separate themselves from it, which means they want this compute centers to do that. So no, it will not. I don't think it will be, but I do think there'll be a lot of talk about it. And there'll be a lot of agents.
Okay, so let's go on to the next one.
Okay.
Deepseek, not deep fake.
Not deep fake.
Deepseek's decision to go fully open source was surprising.
Well,
why do you think they're giving everything away?
That was a weird one, and I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but I can't really help it because part of when you get cynical about some of these things, it was surprising to me. Deepseek is a Chinese company.
Yes.
They are owned by a Chinese company, the Chinese investor that invested in them is really the Chinese government. That's pretty much how it works in China, as I understand it. I'm not an expert on the Chinese, but the Chinese government's got their hand in everything. Well, nobody expected them to release a truly open source model. And so everyone was surprised because the Chinese like to censor things. And when you make something open source, fully open source, I'm not talking about that stuff that OpenAI calls open source because that's not open source.
Right.
When you make something fully open source, people can mess with it. They can change it. They can take stuff, they can add stuff. So why would they do that? Well, I think they're doing it because of something that Sabine Hustle-Fedler talked about. Maybe that's the reason, which we'll talk about in a minute. She's a lady I follow on YouTube. I can't pronounce her last name. But I think they're trying to offset these large corporations. OpenAI started because they were trying to keep Google from owning AI.
Mm-hmm.
They became closed source instead of open source.
Mm-hmm.
So now the play is mostly Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, which owns a good chunk of OpenAI, and then there's a few smaller. I mean, Meta is really not a huge player. They think they are. X is trying to become one, which is Elon Musk, but they're not a huge player.
Not in comparison.
Not in comparison. So the Chinese government's looking at this going, these American companies, first of all, were restricting their access to the GPU technology and stuff like that. And so they
don't want to be left out.
Well, not only that, I think they want to throw a big old stone in the water and stir things up a little bit, keep people churning.
Okay. All right. So the early test, they obviously, now hang on. Training a model that good, so fast, and so cheaply.
Yes.
Do you think they found some secret sauce, or is there something else at play?
I think they did find some better training way to
Okay.
do it. I think they learned from what everybody else did. I do think that it's kind of funny to watch everybody. Well, first of all, they trained the model in less than 60 days, which is unusual.
Very,
They spent less than $6 million, which is ridiculously unusual.
very.
They are getting cheaper to fine tune models, but making a model from scratch tends to be, I mean, the first models were hundreds of millions of dollars kind of thing. It's gotten cheaper.
Do you really think they made it from scratch?
I don't think they made it from scratch. I think that they did a lot. I don't think it's just a fine tune model, though. I think it's more than that. Fine tuning is, I think that they kind of fine tune it, but now they break models up into pieces and they train them differently and then they connect them back together. So I do think that they did a lot of training, but I think that my instinct, whenever I heard about it, was to stay away from it because it's China and I have an inherent distrust of their motives. But the US companies are part of the complaint they have is, well, China's not really being innovative, they're copying. We used to get the moral high ground on that because when it came to hardware, especially, because I remember I was part of that, seeing all these companies offshoring all their stuff to Japan and then to Taiwan. Well, yeah, you move all this stuff over there, the Chinese are going to get better access to it. They're going to steal it rather than make it. And they've done that. But it's hard for OpenAI to complain about somebody stealing their, because they used OpenAI's models and other people's models to help train faster. That's how they did this and make it so good. But how can you take the high ground on that when you still, all that data they used to train theirs, they scrape without paying for off the web?
Right. And not just that, but I mean,
They're still doing
they have been putting things into motion like buying GitHub and some of the other things that they did. Microsoft did that.
Yep.
They were putting things into motion because they kind of knew what they were working on so that they would have access to things.
Yeah, but that was their first paid access.
Right. But they actually bought something without telling the people who are putting all their stuff in that repository that stuff was going to be
Reddit licensed theirs, Stack Exchange licensed theirs. There's a lot of people on Stack Exchange that were upset because it's a free community. All that data was put in there by people for free.
Right, they were sharing their information.
So it's hard to take the high ground, but yes, they used our existing technology and they leapfrogged a lot of steps. From what I hear, it's as good as, it's better than the meta models. It's better probably than X is, but it's even is on par with the O1 model, which is one of the best models out there right now from OpenAI. So
what about censorship? What about the guardrails and things? Do you?
Oh, they absolutely have censorship in it.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, if you ask the Deepseek model, which you can use online now, there's multiple models you can run locally. If you ask it about Tiananmen Square, it's going to ignore you. It's just not going to answer you. If you ask it if Taiwan is an independent country or part of China, it's going to say it's part of China. You expect that, but you can put that data back in it. They got the weights model.
Open source.
I can fine tune that model and put all that data back in it. So it's interesting that they did that because they know people are going to put that back. They're gonna ask the questions when they find it missing. They're going to put it back.
Okay, so let's go on. We're going to be running out of time.
We are running out of time.
When it comes to education, do you think we're moving fast enough to keep people informed, or are we sleepwalking into an AI-driven future?
I think that things are changing faster than education is adapting. And I think we're so paranoid, which we talk about in one of our upcoming presentations, that we're so paranoid about doing the wrong thing that we're doing nothing. And I think people don't realize the kind of damage it's going to do for the kids not being able to use that tool. The tool's not going away.
No.
And you may want it to, you may wish it to, but it's not. Because there's too much money in it. There's too many people getting gains. There's too many people trying to get rid of employees, their highest cost in their business, by utilizing AI or just making themselves augmenting their abilities with AI. Doesn't matter what the reason, it's not going away. Education is just tromping along like nothing's changed.
I'm constantly saying that, the K-12 has to change. K-12 has to change. The human intelligence movement, we're really pushing toward changing the paradigm in K-12. And then someone made a comment today that until colleges and universities are willing to take students without having to take like a college board exam or the SAT or the PSAT or the ACT and all these other tests. It has to change from the top down almost, because we're still going to have to teach the tests so that kids who want to go to college can pass those tests. So it's like, it's not just K-12 that needs to kind of reassess. Universities need to reassess too. But let's talk about Sabine, the lady that you were talking about. I have heard her.
We've heard her in our kitchen because I've had
it. In the mornings, I wake up and I head in there for my coffee and I hear this accent.
She's very German.
Very German, and it's Jim listening to Sabine. So it's Hassenfelder.
Sure.
Sabine Hassenfelder. So she suggests that billionaires are aiming for AGI, and they're not doing it for patriotic reasons. So are we looking at a future where billionaires, where powerful AI call the shots instead of countries? Or is that too sci-fi? What's her opinion? And does your opinion agree?
Her opinion is that if she was the prime minister of UK or whatever, she would be more concerned about these. She would be wanting to build out things at in a government level more than allowing these large corporations to control it. At the end of the day, large corporations are they're never in it for God and country.
Right.
They're in it because they want to make money. And, there was a day a long time, there was a time a long time ago, we had the robber barons, the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and all that other stuff. They were not great people, but the one thing that you could say about them is they lived in the United States. They cared about the United States. Even Henry Ford, who was one of the, around at the same time, said that if the people who work for me can't afford to buy a car, there's no point in me building cars. So they had some level of loyalty to the United States. But when you have companies that are invested in by countries all over the world, they're about making money. And now you've got these people at the top that are worth billions of dollars. You've got, one right now who put hundreds of millions of dollars into electing our current president. He's also trying to upset things in the UK, in Germany, even if his intentions are good, even if he thinks things need to change. Having an individual with that level of power is dangerous. Governments can't control it or even have a say in it. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't think so. Because at least government officials have some accountability to people. Billionaires do not. What they're all talking about is AGI, artificial general intelligence, and then SGI, super intelligence. When you have a company that's headed by a billionaire that has, if you truly believe that AGI is possible, which is super intelligence or artificial general intelligence, then super intelligence, they become a superpower. If that billionaire has access to that level of control and all these AIs wired into everything, it gives them tremendous power over information, over how everything works. There's been so many bad sci-fi stories written about, and by bad, I don't mean bad written, I mean bad.
Person of interest.
Person of interest.
If you haven't watched it,
it sure feels like what's going on.
I had to stop watching it because it just got a little too
close to the reality. And that was done before. That was done like in 2011. That was done well before any of the current, large language model stuff. But in that movie, a small group of people, not the entire government, got control of a super intelligence and used it to make the world a better place.
Right.
So are these billionaires looking out for God and country? Is all this talk of, all the infrastructure we're going to put in the United States, is it really going to benefit the American people? Or is it going to benefit a large corporation and companies and billionaires? I believe AI can change us all. I think it can change the world. I do. And I'm a big believer in it. But I do think it's one of the reasons I'm such a big believer in open source, which makes it so ironic for me that the Chinese government, one of the most repressive governments on the planet, released something that U.S. companies said they would and didn't. That's, whether you like Elon Musk or not, he sued OpenAI and his motives weren't all pure. But he said, you did not live up to what you said. When I invested in the company, you said you were going to open up your models. They haven't even opened up their old models, much less than 3.5. Nobody uses that anymore. Why don't they open source it? They won't.
Yeah.
Why? It's control. It's money. It's power.
To end this podcast, let's talk about Apple and a glimpse into the future. It's something that you made a comment to me earlier today.
I did. So if you believe that country or companies don't have a lot of power, take a look at Apple in France.
Okay.
Apple, I remember this happened a few years ago. The European governments, including France, have said they think Apple should have to open up their store to where other people can put apps in there without having to pay Apple 30%. And Apple gives deals to other people. You know, it's very, very tight thing. And Apple has such a huge market share that they feel like it's almost monopolistic. So they said Apple has to open up their store just like Android does. Apple said to France, if you force us to, we will pull out. There will be no more iPhones, Apple products sold in France. Who gave up? France or Apple?
France.
The country of France gave up rather than have to have Apple pull out of the country. What kind of power does a company have when they can make an entire government change the way they're doing things? I don't disagree with the French. And Apple claims it's for safety and security and all that stuff. It is not. There are ways. It's for 30%. When it's worse, it gives them huge leverage because they don't charge people like Amazon 30%. They cut side deals.
Right.
But these big companies, these big corporations have this incestuous relationship with each other. And the little guys that are just trying to get into they have to pay the 30% no matter what. Well, it gives these big guys a huge advantage that you can never make up unless you become that big.
This is called the opportunity divide.
It is. And I will always be a fan of open source stuff. I will always be a fan of letting everybody see what's under the kimono.
That is one of the reasons that Agnes is wrapped around
open source tools.
Open source tools.
They're not perfect. They have security problems you do have to worry about. But what I tell vendors all the time, if I lock into your product, your company may not be here as long as the Leno ISD will.
Right.
So if I use your product and I integrate into everything and I lock in, what happens when you decide you're going to pull out of that product? You're going to go under. We've had companies go under. So I'm always concerned about locking us into these. You can't use open source for everything. There is a penalty to pay. But I try to use that stuff because they're made by communities, by people who believe in the product, and you can see what's there. Everybody can cross-check everybody else. Is it the answer to everything? No, it is not. But I do believe it's the answer to AI not being controlled by oligarchs. And by the way, oligarch was one of the most looked up words recently on Google.
Oh, really?
I thought that was interesting.
That was very interesting.
Anyway,
okay, so we're going to do something we don't normally do. We are going to end our podcast without just saying goodbye. We're actually going to make a comment that we are not a sponsored podcast. We'd
like to be.
Well, of course we'd love to.
Somebody wants to give us money.
We do this ourselves. We do it so that Jim can talk about AI on Sundays, even though I promise you this is actually not the truth. He actually does talk about AI a lot more than just 35 minutes on Sunday evenings. Mm-hmm. He talks about it all the time. I am an educator. He's an engineer. If you'd like more information about what AI Education Professionals does or AIEdPro.com, you can always email me directly at info@AIEdPro.com, and I will get back with you about Agnes, about our professional development.
Or sponsoring our podcast.
Or about sponsoring our podcast. So we hope that you guys have a marvelous rest of the week.